welcome to Crespect Talks, Head in the Sand or Hands in the Future. And today we'll talk about leveraging AI with Barbora and with Pekka. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, guys. So out of my legal industry, out of the social bubble that I am, I find you two very much inspiring and surprising because you've been practicing law and working in law firms. So I feel like you've been classical lawyers that converted into new generation lawyers. Could you maybe elaborate and share what was the ultimate push for you to leverage technology in your daily lives and in your practice? Barbora, would you like to start?
Please go ahead.
So I would preface this by saying that this didn't really happen naturally, that I was not really a computer kid. I didn't like math until the very last year of high school, and tech was never really something that I grew up around or there would be really persistent practice in my life. But what was quite persistent was my love for languages. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, which language do I want to learn next? And then I superbly naively was thinking to myself, how about I just learn Python? And I went onto a very deep dive on the internet to look for ways how I could do that, because that's just something that I was used to doing when I was learning French or German. And I found this computer science class, which is called CS50. It's provided completely for free from Harvard University, and it's absolutely marvelous. And so I started this, and it was horrible. I was so bad at it, and it just didn't click right away. I was very frustrated, which was not something that I really knew from my legal practice. But over time, I kind of persevered. I was putting in the hours, my code started working better and better. And once it did, I just started seeing the inefficiencies in law everywhere and all the ways how we could deliver value, how we could deliver better, how we could deliver different services. And once I started seeing that, I just couldn't go back to the kind of previous way of thinking that I used to have. And so I was thinking that I couldn't be the only one who has had this kind of revelation, and there must have been smarter people before me who have come to the same conclusions. And so I leaned quite heavily onto the legal tech community that is just so marvelously present online. I became an innovation ambassador at my firm. I did a summer program. I kept on reading absolutely everything that I could find on these topics. And over time, it kind of developed to be a very, very big part of both myself as a person, but also of my legal practice as well.
That's beautiful. Pekka, did you have a revelation moment type of experience yourself?
I don't know whether it was a revelation, but what I can relate with Barbora is that language has always been very important to me. And starting already back in the late 90s, drafting was, of course, always about the language. But then maybe one revelation actually was somewhere March, April 2016. These were the first times, actually, the last time the AI was discussed a lot, about 8 years ago. Machine learning, document automation, all these things. So it was one late night. I was walking at Sorainen, hallways, and I saw people working at the banking and finance teams still around 8 o'clock. I just popped in to check what they're doing. And then on the table of 𝗏𝗏, was one document that was 110 pages long. And I said, is this now the new standard LMA documentation? The European one? Yes, 22 pages of definitions. And then I said that, there is no person in the world who really understands this. It doesn't make any sense anymore. So this stuff must go to algorithms one day. Okay, it took some time for that to realize, but probably that spring was the time that I started to think that, first of all, this has to change, and second of all, I want to be part of that change.
That's beautiful to hear. This change, this new wave, new thinking, new languages. So you are the curious type of lawyers, right? But can we talk a little bit broader? What do you think? Should this feature this characteristic, this personality trait of curiosity, this should be a given for the new generation lawyers. Barbora, I know you're like teaching the future generation lawyers. Do you think what's the new skill set that lawyers this year, next year, and 10 years from now, what's the must in the skill set for them to have?
That's just such a good question, primarily because we have no idea what this is going to look like in a couple of years. I'm just worried to say what it's going to look like in a couple of months, not to mention a decade from now. And so in many ways, when I'm thinking about it, it's like if you decided that you're going to go to the airport and just take the first plane, going wherever, and you're just going to follow that. And you can end up in London, but you can also end up in Norway, and you can end up in south of France or whatever, and now pack for that trip, right? And so in many ways, there are some overarching things. Curiosity is definitely one of them. Creativity could be one of them too. Critical thinking, of course, will be very handy. Some
Yes.
sort of mental flexibility of not really being restricted to just, oh, I'm a lawyer and so I can only do law and law only and nothing else is relevant for me. But when it comes to the more like, specific skills, I do see a lot of future for service design, for project management in general, for just this human-centric thinking, which really puts the customer or the client or the user at the center of whatever we do. And these kinds of lenses that the lawyers need to learn to apply in order to stay relevant and kind of also iterate on what kind of skills will be required and useful in the future, because that is 100% going to change.
Should we learn Python?
That's a good question. I think that if you really are into it, that you want to learn it for yourself, sure, go ahead, start learning coding. But if it is, and I've seen this with lawyers quite a bit lately, is that, oh, I should start learning to code because there's this AI revolution happening and I want to stay relevant. And it's not really that there will be any sort of like intrinsic motivation to do that. It's more something that more from a position of fear rather than curiosity. Then I do think that it's much more valuable skill to kind of dabble a little bit in some of the other domains, to really learn how the experts think and how they talk in other domains, and then be the subject matter expert that really can facilitate the transformation from a lawyer perspective, because the perspective is still super valuable. You know yourself that without good subject matter experts inside, you cannot build anything, right? So even this very lawyerly perspective is very valuable. So there's not a universal answer, like, go ahead and learn to code. It's more lean into the kind of proclivities that you have and see how you can leverage them within the system.
Pekka, do you think like there has to be some sort of IT angle to the set of education, set of skills that our today's lawyers and law firms, especially, like this is the sphere I'm in, should they acquire some skills like that? Is this a given now?
I don't know whether they should have specific skills, but understanding is important. That why, for example, some programs are used and what they use, how they operate on a higher level. I share the view that Barbora, you said that critical thinking. I think this is one of the key elements, not only for lawyers but anybody in the world. Now that if all the content creation goes to AI-based tools, who teaches critical thinking to people who then deliver services based on the end results of those tools? And I think that's one of the key elements that every lawyer, every person actually needs to know. And then when it comes to lawyers, in an interesting way, I think we go back to where we all started, before any tools, before even written documentation, which means that the lawyer is there to help their clients to take the worry away, as we often say, you remember at 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀. And I think that now in the time of AI, it's even more about taking the anxiety away. So lawyers still need to be the interface to human clients when the services are delivered, to explain what they get and why things are done as they're done. Like a counselor, as they should be, not legal typist as they are now.
Like a co-pilot.
Like a human co-pilot, yeah, indeed. Yeah.
A human co-pilot. Let's emphasize on human. Right.
But it's needed. it's needed.
So, Pekka, you've been in law firm for many years, right? Then you were heading EY Baltic Legal Department. Now you're like having this like sharp eye to identify innovative and potentially fast-growing startups. Do you think there are some like qualities that we could maybe draw a parallel from like innovative startups to innovative law firms? What are the signs identifying that, okay, these are forward thinkers? Are there like secret sauce that maybe you could share?
The secret sauce is very simple, actually. Those who try the least to protect existing businesses are the best innovators. And that's a problem for the law firms, actually, and no offense. And actually, now I don't have to say no offense. It's true. So why the technology developments in most law firms, even the leading law firms, have always lagged behind is that they have too much legacy business to protect the 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀, to protect the vast forces of 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 people. So that then is the same for any other business. Those who don't try to protect existing businesses but try to disrupt them in a right and constructive manner, they're the best startups.
And if to draw a parallel, like best innovative law firms would be those that are disrupting their ways of working?
Yes, and I have told many law firm partners these days that if you would like to make a difference now, you would make radical statements and actions. I mean, and walk the talk, so to say. Starting from the fact that this is the first law firm that doesn't have 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. This is the law firm that doesn't anymore hire any new lawyers. We don't need any new lawyers. We hire people who have legal capabilities, and you can use all these new AI tools. So these law firms, I'm looking forward to emerge. They haven't yet.
That's bold. Is there like any other, like in general, is there room for classical law firms? What's the trend? Like, what do you think? Okay, not 10 years from now, a year or 2 years from now, what do you think would be the standard legal service provider? Will it be a bot?
I think the law firms will always be there. That not always, but in the foreseeable future. But their role must change, and their business models must change. And it all changes when the clients' demand change. And it doesn't take long that the vast majority of people understand that the law firms actually use these very same tools that we use, and that they start to ask questions that, okay, if you have all these tools in place, why then something costs 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours worth of time? Because it actually takes a couple of seconds to work. When clients en masse start to make these questions and demands and not to accept the standard answers, then the change happens. The same way as 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 was born. The 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 was born actually only in the turn of 50s and 60s, when the first large US law firms started to ask their then counsels that you need to put down the hours that what your people do for us. Because during those times, the law firms were working on let's say a fixed fee contingency basis. So the big law firms, I think it was GE, one of them, started to ask that, okay, please send us a detailed list of the hours that your people work for us last month. And that was the creation of 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. Now maybe the creation is that they don't accept the 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 anymore. But the clients, they will drive the change.
I'm absolutely, yeah, 100% fully support. And I think, Barbora, what you said, and there was this Legal Geek conference in Amsterdam. I really liked what you shared, that the future is law. I will not quote it accurately, but the future is law is not only shaped by lawyers anymore, right? There's room for more people, for more different titles, different positions, more engineers. Is that
Yes.
correct? Barbora, would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in general a big fan of having multidisciplinary teams, also just so that we don't close ourselves up in those kinds of echo chambers that really limit our thinking again to just this law exclusive way of thinking. But at the same time, I wouldn't honestly say that black for the traditional service providers, because I think that ultimately, and you kind of alluded to that already, that it boils down to the customers. And there are still so many clients that are seeking those more conservative legal services, which is totally okay, because we, as each one of the service providers, we need to decide who are we kind of aiming for, who is our customer, who's our client, and then structure the service around that. And there will always be people who are not going to be asking those questions, who will want to have this kind of artisanal approach to legal services. And then on the other hand, there is a emerging way of thinking about law, which is definitely much more AI driven, which is definitely much more process driven and project management driven and so on. And the real question is just, from a perspective of a service provider, where do we want to sit on the scale? What kind of market we want to target? Is this market large enough to make these efforts worthwhile? Is this market sustainable for us long term? And then also, of course, the question of, are our incentives aligned to this kind of specific goals that we want to target? So I think that there's definitely a holistic argument to make around all of this, to really just decide, like, what is our position on the market, and then take every single one of the decisions around that from that one specific point.
But looking into LinkedIn, not but, maybe and, looking into LinkedIn and the job roles and the positions that law firms are currently hiring and looking for, there's definitely way more like legal tech engineers, IT engineers, knowledge management consultants. Like, is this a trendy FOMO, or this is a new reality? What do you think?
If I may, I think that there's one thing that really needs to come with these roles, and that is that the cost of innovation is not just the overhead for innovation people and the subscription for tools. That if any firm is serious about actually integrating innovative approaches, there is a cost of integration. There is the learning curve that needs to also happen on the side of the legal professionals. There's just the cognitive overload of putting in, learning with new systems and changing the ways we work. There's, of course, the cost that comes with just the cultural shift around the company, that maybe there would be more voice to the multidisciplinary professionals, or maybe more junior people would get a bigger say at the table. And so roles are a nice start, but there is definitely an element of making innovation happen that's not necessarily, well, most unlikely to be found on LinkedIn, which is definitely still like a tiny segment of the entire market.
Pekka, do you have a say on this trend? Maybe you haven't noticed that, what's happening in law firms yet lately?
Yeah, maybe indeed it is a trend. And as oftentimes with many trends, people, I wouldn't say it's a FOMO, but people tend to jump into the trends. Oftentimes, even in big corporations, like, hey, we don't have that yet, we need to do that too. So let's do something that in that, let's say, domain. And I think that quite a bit of that is happening now in the legal world.
In the end, what's the phrase? Trash in, trash out. You get what you measure. So if it's only, if it's only the tools and it's only the titles, right? But there's no incentives. There's no room for failure, room for learning, and yeah, we could speak for hours about that.
But also, maybe it's not so sinister view at the end of the day. It's also part of PR marketing efforts. So the law firms, of course, making themselves trendy by doing these actions. And then they can tell to their clients that, look, as you can see from the public domain, we have now hired these 10 new people only focusing on legal tech and AI. We are on top of this game. So there is an element of that too.
Yeah. Maybe also like another thing, and that is that just innovation is so difficult to measure, right? Like, how would you approach that even? Like, there is not really any way how you could say, oh, we're 60% innovative or something like that. Even if you put in the hours, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be successful, because if failure is definitely just the base cost of any innovation, that you have to try out a whole bunch of things, and some of them are going to work, some of them are not going to work. And so there's not really a way how we would say like, oh, we turned on the switch on innovation and now everything is innovative, because there's just not really this kind of straightforward measurement there.
Oh, I like where is this going, but how can you measure it? Save time, increase the profitability? Like what are your like KPIs of adopting innovation?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it can go two ways. Well, one of them would be the savers, meaning that how much time and resources can we save, even not just money-wise on the side of the client, which is, of course, if we're talking capped work, it's not necessarily going to be terribly visible on the bill, but also just the cognitive load, maybe like the quality of the work. Definitely. The questions like, are our people spending their time on things that are respective of their seniority and of their skills? Is the work meaningful? And so those are kind of the savers, that's really hinting at that kind of repetitive work that nobody really wants to be doing, but it's so important because it needs to be done and it's a major part of the legal services. But then we have the other thing, and I love to focus more on that segment because I feel like that one just has so much opportunity for real disruption in terms of how we provide the services. And those are the delights. How can we take what we're doing right now and put something extraordinary on top of that? I'm talking if you're staying at a hotel, you can focus on, the cleaning, the maintenance, having efficiency of operations. But then you can also create those kinds of moments that people are going to remember. Then you can create a kind of service that will be like, wow, these guys are really good. We want to come back to them again. And those are not necessarily, again, just those very quantitative elements to that, but there is definitely a qualitative feeling to that as well, which can be enhanced using all sorts of different technical and also design tools as well. Like how much psychological safety am we conveying? Are we creating an image where we have all of our ducks in a row and we're delivering on time and creating this kind of sense of we are on top of things? And those are things that are, again, terribly difficult to measure, but they can definitely add value to the services that we're providing.
Yeah.
Hard to measure, hard to identify. There's like a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of enthusiasm, I'd say. And like at Crespect, we're trying to reinvent and rethink the classical practice management, right? We're trying to consider like how an embedded AI agent could help you, harvest time, capture insights, and so on. And it's like, oh, this is the future. This is exciting. Yet on the other hand, it might be also somehow frightening. So do you have any, I don't know, recommendations, tips, how to not be afraid, how to embrace innovation, how to take this maybe like leap of faith in innovative tools? Like, it's a step out of comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
Is there a tip how to be braver in taking this step?
I think it's if talking about lawyers now, the typical lawyer is always worried about a mistake. A mistake means the same as to fail at something. And I think that the biggest comfort zone coming out of for lawyers is that not to worry about the failure. I'm not saying that you will fail in a client engagement, but when it comes to innovative part of how you try to maybe build new tools or improve your practices, that don't worry about failure there. Just accept the fact that, like Barbora said, that not all innovations, maybe most of the innovations don't go anywhere, but some do. So it is easy to say, but hard to implement. Just don't worry about the mistakes.
I love that, Pekka. That's just one of the things that's just so difficult for lawyers, right? Like we're shaped and sculptured to
Yes.
be fearful of any sort of error, because for us, it can be a very big deal if there is any sort of error. And so like this is very deeply ingrained in a lot of lawyers, most of the lawyers likely. I would say that the big thing would be to invite people from other domains to the table who maybe don't have this kind of predestined fear of failure, but also create opportunities for failure that doesn't feel like it is a failure. Because I think that there is a very big question about how we frame this problem around innovation or this opportunity around innovation. Because if we're talking that we would have, let's say, a determined sandbox that would be restricted time-wise, that would have a very clear mandate, and maybe you would even consider the number of failed attempts to be a KPI and really structure it in another way that would reframe the failure into something a little bit more constructive, then now we're talking, right? Now we can work with these kinds of feelings and with these very deep psychological proclivities of lawyers in a very proactive manner that can really reframe our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I really like this number of attempted failures, and these traits, that makes us good lawyers. The risk awareness, right? This is the quality of a lawyer. This is what makes me a good lawyer. I'm very risk averse. I'm very detailed oriented, but on the other hand, these personality traits are kind of withholding me from becoming fast in adopting changes, fast in adopting innovation. So, yeah, this is brilliant to hear. And reframing maybe that it's not a failure, but it's a learning. And there's a common phrase in the startup world fail fast, but is it actually fail fast or learn fast? Because if failure has such a negative aftertaste, it's a failure. I'm a failure. We failed. This project failed. We lost money and so on. But it's no, we tried something new. We learned that it's not a solution, but maybe the next one will be. And with head of knowledge management, with head of innovations, lately, everyone is trying to change the attitude in the industry that it's not a failure, it's a learning curve, and there will be more and more and more failures, and we just have to get used to that, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But at the same time, when you're talking startups, we're also talking the size of the failure in a way. Because when you're iterating on a product, that might be much smaller thing than the scale of most of innovative attempts in law firms or in legal departments and so on. And I think that that is really the root of the problem as well, to just have these kinds of much smaller initiatives, to try out something in smaller, more definitive pilots, to have different free trial kind of feeling experiences where we focus on a much smaller scale before we go on to the larger one. Because that is one of the things that a lot of lawyers think, oh, either I am innovative or I'm not. It's like a black and white A/B kind of situation. While this is, again, a scale. And the way how to get from one side of the scale to the other is small incremental steps, not some sort of a big radical change where the failure would hurt so much more than if you're kind of iterating and learning from it as you go along.
Beautiful. I feel we could talk for hours, but I want you to actually show some of the latest developments of yours. And, not many lawyers or professionals in this industry have actually created agents and worked with AI. So instead of, ignoring the reality and putting your head in the sand, you're actually having this hands on the future. So would you mind sharing some of the latest creations and your sandbox that you're playing around? Pekka, could you maybe start from your AI agents?
I can try if I can share this correctly. Yeah. Can you see this now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, building an agent, this is a test space in our own ABS dedicated, let's say, server where we are building, we have been building, let's say, commercial contract agent covering most any commercial aspects. So that is a little bit, there's interactivity, but there's also a big database of world-leading agreements that have ever been made. So we have started from the top down, that we have, I don't know, Facebook IPO documentation, we have Pfizer licensing agreements, and many things that you can find from public domain, but also that you find in the private domain. So here we are just testing different kind of simple things like this. Craft to sale purchase of a Finnish company that sells an Estonian aircraft to Latvian company. It sounds complicated already. Then, the agent comes back with some questions. We have taught it to ask questions that it doesn't understand from the context, or it can't, let's say, comprehend from the context, meaning documentation given to it and the commands given to it or the prompts given to it. So it asks questions, and then it starts to draft documentation. First, it comes in this kind of, let's say, like a bulk of text. And here we also then follow that what is the, let's say, reasoning, that why it comes to certain kind of conclusions. And then we direct these reasonings, that are they in the right direction or in the wrong direction. And, gradually we will then come, in our opinion, to the right kind of reasoning. Yes, there's no point to go through this in detail. And then finally, after a couple of iterations, we come with the full document draft. We still need to piece it together from certain parts, but we also have an API that will bring it directly to Word document, actually. So we're not able to open it right here, but actually now we have a version of this that it brings all this to Word, so that there is like a direct document drafted in your settings, whatever font you want to have, and in whatever kind of width and depth of the document you want to have. So this is a very simple, let's say, trial and error, as we were talking about the failure aspect. So we guide it to a certain direction, follow the reasoning, and the end result starts to be pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. So what are like other use cases? So you're trying to like simplify the contract creation part with like having questions, answers, and then summarizing. Like whatever, did I understand correctly?
Yeah.
And if yes,
Yes.
what like other use cases?
And actually, then
playing
you can
around?
you can feed the documentation that you have. For example,
Mhm.
let's take the privacy policies of the world leading mobile gaming publishers. Give them to that and say that use these and provide us with the version for our Estonian-based mobile gaming company. And just lately, we have started to have pretty convincing results, meaning that the documentation that it provides starts to be flawless, and it doesn't, they don't miss anything. So pretty impressive.
And how do you like address it? Is this like an exercise? Is that like a gym for new generation, today's lawyers? Or this is something that you are convinced that will replace a lot of like hours that you're currently spending on this? Is it just like a for practice, or is it trustworthy enough to actually use this type of contract?
Yeah, I would say that still needs some human oversight, obviously, for some time. But the idea being that, let's take an example that you have a law firm, they have a lot of model documentation. You just feed them all here. They are, of course, categorized that what they represent. This is an, I don't know, license agreement, and this is an SPA from the seller side, the buyer side, or whatever side. And then you start, let's say, shaping up your existing documentation. And then finally, you can create for any transaction the documentation, the first draft that is 99% correct already. So it saves a lot of time, obviously. And then what you need is just the oversight part. And finally, for any person to run their own legal affairs through that. Some simple things that, I want to sell my boat to Karolina. And Karolina lives in Lithuania, I live in Estonia. Can you draft a simple documentation, what we should take into account, how this functions? And it does that.
And then I get a boat.
And then you get a boat.
Congratulations. Just got a boat. So this is like one way of approaching, right? Barbora, could you like show and tell a little bit of your approaches, how you're trying new things lately?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would maybe focus on the teaching part of my activities, because I loved how you mentioned the gym, like the creative gym for the next generation. And so that's my job, really. I designed the creative gym for next lawyers. And so I do have to abide by certain design principles there, meaning that, for example, everything has to be super easily accessible. So there cannot be really any vendor lock-ins or any significant paywalls or anything, because we're talking students, right? It needs to be very approachable. It needs to be very actionable, and which means that we are working mostly with widely available tools. I'm talking GPT or Claude or Mistral or like some of those very much in the public domain. We're not working with any sort of confidential information because, again, we're in a university setting. And so one of my favorite things is something that I refer to as rapid prototyping. So imagine that you just take some sort of a document. So for example, we would be working with EU legislation. Usually you would have a very long document that would have dozens of pages. And what you can do is just to upload it to whatever engine you choose to use. I quite prefer to use Claude artifacts, but this is just as of right now, because in a couple of weeks it can be something completely different. But just uploading this and then exploring different ways, how could this be visualized, how this could be expressed in an expert system, how it could be a chatbot, how it could be all sorts of different data formats. And so what it does for the young lawyers is that they get to see, number one, that maybe the answer to every single legal problem is not a wall of text. Maybe it can be a completely different experience. Maybe it can be a chatbot, or maybe that a chatbot is a terrible, horrible idea that will never ever work in that kind of scenario. But then they can also explore all sorts of different avenues in there. Maybe they can turn their legal advice into an interactive checklist. Maybe it can be a flowchart. Maybe it can be a mind map. Maybe it can be a visualization that will use pictograms to deliver the message to their users. And so just by opening these kinds of creative avenues and using the generative AI as a vessel for almost as an imaginary, as something that they can project their ideas about what the law could look like, but with drastically shortening the time investment that it takes to create that kind of visualization, that kind of like idea of what the law could behave like in practice, means two things. And so first is that they are much more likely to think creatively about law in general because they have seen what it behaves like in practice and that it is quite achievable. And number two is also that they can go ahead and test it, right? If we're talking about we have an idea of building a chatbot around this specific question, maybe they can show the visualization that they prepared in 5 minutes using GPT or Claude or whatever, and click around with that and ask for feedback and see how people react to that. Is this something that could be viable? Is this something that is worth spending a lot of time into? Because developing stuff and making production ready things takes a lot of time and resources. So you probably want to use this kind of rapid prototyping, which has been supercharged by the AI, to weed out the bad ideas and to open these creative avenues and try out new stuff. So AI has been absolutely unprecedented in that. And this is more of a teacher hack, I do have my own AI bot that helps me answer student questions around organizations. But that is more like a, the process kind of based situation that we were talking about earlier. So the rapid prototyping can really happen in a variety of different ways. In this specific example, what I did is that I would feed the chatbot a extract from the General Data Protection Regulation on the right to be forgotten. Again, you could use, of course, another chatbot to extract that information for you. In this case, I just use it to prime the engine to prepare me a first prototype of a way how this could be communicated to different sorts of users. And so what it prepares, it's a very basic prototype where we would have 3 different perspectives, which kind of change the wording that we share depending on who is looking at it and how long it should be. And so now the beauty of this is that once we do have that prototype, what we can do is to do very easy iterations on that prototype, meaning that, for example, if I want more meaningful heading for this application, then I can put it in there and kind of have a discussion with the chatbot window, which will help me discern a better prototype that will be more akin to what I would want to achieve with the production version. So here we are already getting a little bit more towards the original vision, and you can see that the user can interact with the chatbot window to change all sorts of different things before we get to something that we would be happy with. And the beauty of this is that we can, by investing very little amounts of resources and time, to create a clickable prototype that we can test with the users. We can see if it's even worth exploring actually this kind of medium for this kind of legal problem. And the goal here is not really to make something perfect. It is more to create something that we can learn from, to make it this kind of bite-sized innovation that will enable us to examine different ways of solving the legal problem.
Guys, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. But like, if you could share one advice for our viewers on how to embrace innovation, on how to leverage AI, like wearing sunscreen is always one of the options to share advice. But like in this AI world, what would be your short tip and suggestion where to start from?
So I have one very simple, straightforward advice for anybody who's a decision maker, and that is don't buy tools without making research first. Just 100% fair and square.
Don't.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Yeah.
No.
I think that's a good tip. Maybe two tips. One for the user is that just try. It's so simple actually that if you go to ChatGPT explore space, you can very easily build your own agent without any knowledge of any coding or anything, just logical thinking. And then you can see already the results of your work, and maybe you catch some fire and you want to go deeper in that. So what I'm saying is that the entry barrier is very, very low. But then for the decision makers, exactly on that point of product, there is, I dare to say, 90% of whatever is sold now in the so-called AI space, not the big engines, the Claudes and the OpenAI, ChatGPTs, but the different kind of agents that are just quick fixes. Because people are just making something happening fast and then trying to push it out as a product. But it really is just a user interface, and behind that is ChatGPT. Building anything, how would I say, anything deep still takes some time and efforts and resources, maybe even more than before.
And if I could add one tip from Crespect, put your kitchen in order, start collecting data so that you could analyze, and so that smart algorithms could hint you with what to do next, right? So guys, thank you very much. I think our viewers had fun, and there are some discussions happening in the comment section, so we'll get back to those comments and questions straight away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.